meteorite story? It was like 2 days ago. There was, along those lines, it was really interesting. There was I don't know whether it's a new theory or something that's getting more attention now, but they were looking at the extinction of the dinosaurs and the meteorite that hit the Earth, and there was a theory that when the meteorite hit the Earth, it actually sent a spray of vaporized rock into space that turned into silica rain, that when it re-entered the atmosphere caused so much heat that the surface of the Earth would have heated to like 900 degrees or something like that. So yeah, and I think there's, I think Trevor and Phil could probably answer this better, but one thing I think we need to be careful about is the what about stuff is interesting academically and is interesting historically and helps us understand the current situation. But you just can't get around the fundamentals. If you have an enclosed system and you keep putting energy into it, it's going to warm up. And by figuring out how the dinosaurs died, that doesn't really make us into a situation where we can ignore that reality, right? Because now we understand something better. But it is fascinating. Maybe Phil wants to, Trevor.
The only thing I was going to add is,
let me just say the question first so that whoever's here can hear it. So the question was essentially, if we had these introductions of energy in the past, whether it be a meteorite or something like that, what Dan was just speaking to, how does that impact us now? Why is this different than what had happened before? So Phil, go.
So again, great question. We've had several events. The moon is my perfect reference. You look at the cratering on the moon. When the solar system was being formed, there were a ton of cataclysmic events that would have just pounded out life on the Earth like nothing. Okay, but energy gets transferred from hot to cold, and CO2 can be absorbed through plants. Okay, so dinosaurs weren't sitting around thinking about how are we going to survive this meteorite that's about to hit us, right? No, it happened, and a large population of the life died off, and things cooled off, and CO2 and oxygen and nitrogen did whatever they did to get to the levels. But as Ryan was mentioning, we have billions of people on this planet. We have a lot of very intelligent, conscious life who are asking these questions now, versus
in a different time frame.
In a very different time frame.
I mean, that's the thing I always tell my evolution students when we're looking at the history of life on Earth, is that as we move further back, and we're talking 2 billion years ago, right, in evolution, you're no longer getting the precision of measurement anymore. And so I always laugh when people will say, like, well, that era started 456 million years ago. Like, oh, really?
Give or take 10 million
years. 10 million
What's 10
years.
Million years?
And so students will ask, like, on an exam, how close do I have to get to the date? And I go, well, it just depends on how long ago it was. But so with the dinosaurs, that's a very specific event, right? So we have this 59, 60 million year window where that occurred. But because of that, and even with like since the Pleistocene, so 2.5 million years ago or so, particularly within the Holocene, our time of history of human social whatever, you can get these fine things. And so we'll look at weather for the past 100 years, right, and get the sense of climate change. If you're talking about an ice age that occurred 13,000 years ago, the time frames are fascinating, right? There's tons of people trying to figure out exactly how quickly it happened. 100,000 years ago, it even gets harder. These are ice cores and things like that they're trying to look at, those lakes in the Bahamas. But once you get back like 10 million years ago, what can look like a flash in the fossil record might have been 3 times longer than the human species has even existed, right? And then the further back you go, it even gets worse and worse and worse. So it's hard to understand. And that's the big question. Like, if this goes to hell in the next 75 years, right, and then recovers, we're all gone because the Earth burned up. What would that look like in the fossil record? We'd see like a bunch of face masks and then nothing, right? Humans are suddenly gone.
We'd see trash.
We'd see a lot of
We'd
trash.
see trash.
Right? And so, you know, some future civilization looking back on it might not even consider global warming as an issue. They might be like, some weird disease came through and killed them all. Look at these face masks. Right?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting thing when you talk about geologic time. It's probably the last thing I'll say about this, but because I don't want to beat the horse dead, but you know, we are observing a very small event that we do not have the resolution to recreate in the past climate time record. We just don't. However, that's not really relevant because we have a physical understanding of how climate works on Earth. And as Phil and I were talking about, like the atmosphere and what happens when we introduce certain gases into it and what kind of energy that traps. So knowing what has happened in the past is very interesting, but understanding, like we're at this point, we're trying to figure out what the tipping point is. Like what's going to happen when we hit this certain point, right? That's really interesting when we're trying really hard, but I would say that almost the take home is, well, it doesn't really matter where the tipping point is because we're rushing toward it, right? In a lot of ways. And we've got, you know, these ice cores that are really fascinating that allow us to actually recreate the composition of the atmosphere because tiny gas bubbles are trapped in the ice in Antarctica, right? And we can take those gas bubbles and we can look at them and say, this is what our atmosphere looked like. How does that compare to now? And that's how we actually end up doing these temperature recreations to figure out that our climate has been changing. But again, the past is important, but what's truly important is that we know the impacts that are happening right now. We know what's going to happen in the future. As far as if we continue on this path, the Earth will just continue to get warmer and those feedbacks will go through. But yeah, Larry.
When I hear the term climate change or global warming, it's usually with a negative connotation. I'm wondering if there's any climate change that actually will be beneficial to your, I think of Hawaii and how that was formed through volcanic activity, and maybe somebody around at that time was devastated by it, or, you know, how it's taken. So I wonder if there any theory on some climate change that would actually help.
That's a great question. I mean, I think, you know, it helps a lot of different things, but not what, so as humans, we like static. We don't like dynamic. We don't like change. We would like everything to stay the same, please, and thank you. So the fact of climate change is just a change, which is a negative dust. It will take away the lizards, as they mentioned, the migratory birds. Those are all being impacted by this in a negative way. That's not to say that there aren't other animals that will thrive in that situation, and that will happen. Plants love it.
Fire ants for everyone.
Yeah, fire ants for everyone. Plants are like CO2, sign me up. It's not so desirable for other species. And in our sort of, we have this deity type view of the Earth. The Earth is ours and we control it and it's our plaything. If we were to say, let's just let it roll, we would just accept the fact that we're going to go extinct and sit by and let it happen.
I think that it's important to note that, like, when we're talking about climate change, and we're talking about like what's good for the Earth, it's what's good for Earth as we know it. If we're gone, the Earth will, you know, the Earth's going to be here.
Yep.
The Earth's going to recover and the Earth's going to just keep going. It's been through a lot of phases and where it's been inhabitable for us. So, you know, why wouldn't it still be here when we're gone? You know, so it's more about making sure that we can still be here so that we can learn more about our Earth and how to take care of ourselves and get comfortable with that change. And
Well, there's also the utilitarian side of it, like where the philosophical view of that, where you're trying to maximize positive things for things that can actually experience them. The Earth can't experience emotions as far as we know. The animals on Earth probably can. And so if we're doing things that causes mass extinctions and bringing it back to Ryan here, you know, when we talk about exponential growth of populations, those poor people who have had me for evolution. Any evolution students in here? Some of my bio students. What it means when you have exponential growth and you don't see it growing exponentially. The squirrels outside don't have birth control, right? The fact that it's not growing exponentially means there's a whole lot of death going on, right? So if that population is level, all the squirrels are still having babies. It's just a lot of squirrels are flat on the road, or, you know, red-tailed hawks have, right? And so that kind of response, you know, if you're looking at a stable world, right, and you've understood what's actually happening in these populations, you want to get back to that idea that, you know, if we're trying to save stuff, what are we trying to do? Saying the earth is going to be okay is like saying, well, my car will be okay. You know, it's not going to be upset about this. And so, you know, I think we really need to think about, but there is this, you know, may nothing new arise idea of like, you know, well, it could be a better place, warmer. We're in upstate New York. I could have lakeshore property or oceanside property at some point. It gets warm enough. Long ways off. Hopefully it's a long ways off. But, you know, I wouldn't mind it if winter just stopped. I do like the tropics. Well, you know, 400 million years ago, we were in the tropics.
Yeah, well, that's more plate tectonics.
Yeah. But so I, you know, that's important. When we get to solutions, right? I think we need to think about that as well. Is, you know, survival, but is that maximizing the number of humans on Earth? We actually do have birth control. We don't have to die if we take care of each other. And so, you know, the solutions, I think, really are going to be, you know, the positive side on the solutions is lots of them are good. I don't know if you guys noticed when we went into lockdown with COVID, did you notice the air felt a little bit cleaner, you know, and it was quiet and you could hear the birds. And so my brother was in Chicago and he was just like, dude, this is just amazing, right? And, you know, everything changed. And so there's a lot of stuff that we just accept as part of society. Like if you were living in London in the 1850s, you just accepted coal dust on everything, right? And what was the London fog, you know, that would kill you. And that was just life, right? And I still think there's stuff that we have that in fixing the climate issue, we would actually improve. Like electrify, I have two old cars, 73 Porsche and 84 Mustang. If I could put cheaply an electric engine in those things and some nice lightweight batteries in a second, right? Because they're just, anybody here driven an electric car? Oh, that's sad. All right, my wife's got one. They're awesome. They're awesome. They're, you know, I'm a sports car fan, right? They are really good. They're better than gas engine cars, right? And so we're used to driving around kind of crappy vehicles, right? Terribly inefficient vehicles. We have the technology now, just the batteries are really where we need to improve. Gen Chem. Yeah. Take
Galvanic cells.
I feel, I was just gonna say, to go along with that, talking about solutions, I feel like you hit the nail on the head. I feel like a lot of focus is put on the individual, almost to be guilted, like, hey, if you don't fix this, you're gonna destroy the environment. When in reality, it is more larger industrial kind of groups like automakers, other industrial plants, where that's kind of the focus. Not saying that individuals shouldn't do anything, everyone should do their part, but the kind of focus or the extent to which an individual can do is only so much compared to larger groups and entities. You know, so.
Yeah, I think that's, let's take some questions, but yeah.
Thank you. Gentlemen, first I thank the college and you folks for doing this. I believe that public education and discourse is the foundation of change. The question I struggle with continually is how do we convince individuals, governments, and institutions to make change? The problem with it as an individual, it's a global problem. What can I do?
Yeah,
It's funny.
If we could have global climate change invade Ukraine.
I think so. This is a really interesting point. I mean, and you just mentioned like it's the onus of the industry, and that is true to an extent. But if you look at what our goals are, right, we're trying to get below 2 degrees Celsius warming globally. That's by I believe 2100, right? That's our target. we're going to go north of that target by a long shot if we continue on our current pace. The only way to depress that to 2 degrees is to have actually non-developed nations change the way that they develop. We are actually in a place where us completely converting to electric vehicles or completely going to green energy would not move the needle significantly enough to depress the amount of CO2 that needs to go out. That doesn't mean that that doesn't need to happen. It should happen. However, what we need to do, in my opinion, and again, this is just an opinion, I mean, solutions are opinions, right? Is move towards collecting this knowledge and sharing it. And as much as I think the onus is on industry, again, the individual can change their life. You think about something so simple as like, and I'm not a vegetarian, I'm just gonna say that right now, stopping eating beef. The amount of beef that it takes to raise one cow, and the amount of carbon that they produce, and then the amount of carbon that is used to ship that, one cow across America is insane. If the entire United States just went vegetarian for one meal only, we would save billions of gallons of water and millions of pounds of CO2. And I mean, methane as well, right? Which is another greenhouse gas. So I think like a personal change can begin just by reducing. And that's the key. Like electric vehicles are great, but it's better just to reduce in general. Because in fact, car engines are more efficient in a lot of cases than the power plants that are generating our energy. That's true. So, this whole idea that you're going to have a plug-in car, unless you're on green energy, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because then you're trading your more efficient car engine for a less efficient gas power plant, right? And so
there's some geopolitical issues there too.
Sure, and there's
And
all
we are in
sorts
New
of.
York, so most of our energy comes from Niagara.
We are 60% hydroelectric in New York, but we still have trash plants in New York. We have 4 of them. We still have the other almost 40% is natural gas. And just keep in mind, if we all bought an electric car, that's a lot more mining of rare earth minerals that needs to happen, which is huge.
I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think most people agree with it as well.
Mhm.
But the question is, how do we do that? How do you convince me to stop eating meat, to shorten my shower, to ride my bike when 1 billion people in China don't care about it? It's global. And that's what makes it hard. It's just me against the whole world. And I don't want to make the change. I'm lazy. I don't want to
I get that.
I'm an American.
I get that. I mean, I think that societies can force that change. I mean, I think that individuals can force that change by, you explain to people what your life is. You say, this is the choice I make. It takes a long time, but education, running events like this, getting people aware of what they're doing so they think when they make these choices, instead of just saying, I need some tape, I better order it on Amazon.
I mean, you think of
versus going to a store.
change, like child labor, right? Or even having Sundays and Saturdays off and things like that. They would have been unthinkable 100 years ago, right? Child labor would have been thinkable 100 years ago. And it would have just been, well, why don't you hire so-and-so to clean your house? Whereas nowadays you would never, hopefully, imagine doing some of those things. And maybe that's, it's just like, can we do it in the time frame that's necessary? Can you fundamentally change the way people kind of think about the world? And
I think too, talking about like coming up with solutions, I think it's always easy to start small. So in respects to migratory birds, even though my studies were done in South Carolina, they're nesting, they're eating and foraging up here in New York. It's kind of cliche, but the most easy thing to do is plant native plant species and plant a variety of native plant species, because like I was talking about, these birds are in a very kind of balanced phenology or ecosystem that climate change can disrupt very quickly. But if there's a variety of different plants that they can kind of depend on, then it offers a greater chance of survival. So just kind of simple introductory steps like that can always help as well.
So presumably, when the representative democracy, big things voting, right? Voting and voting smartly, and that's challenging. So could each of you just come up with one question? It can be one question you want to ask, you want to be asked to on national policy recommendation, all the way down to be those kind of issues that we as voters, because we all here can vote, should be honing in on when we're trying to assess who do we want at the policy level.
Well, this is something that I think about every day, so I can go first. I think the most critical thing, and it's something that I just said, is what are we doing to help developing nations to get their energy? Because right now, what they're doing is they're burning trash. They are buying our recycling illegally in our country, but we're selling it to them anyway and burning it. That's what's happening. That is a reality because they need energy. They're growing. And it's unfair to say you can't grow because we already did. So how do we help them to get there? I think that's the question we should be asking, is because what we're doing at home is super important and we should make an example. We should think about these things. And I think it's happening, but it's even more important. Those nations, India is even too far gone. I'm talking about Africa as a continent, all the nations that exist in there, which are the fastest growing countries in the world right now. And they are developing new energy sources, which are not sustainable, right? So.
I see a bunch of questions, but just to say it here, going back to the vehicles versus power plant things, if you have 100 gasoline powered vehicles, that's 100 emission sources versus one single power plant. So a big thing for me is regulating emissions from big sources. And my point here is, if that power plant can provide electricity cleanly, and the way we do this these days is we have what are referred to as chemical scrubbers. So you have whatever you're burning coming out of smokestack, and then you aerosolize these chemicals into the smokestack. And that takes a lot of the inefficient combustion stuff out. It either solidifies or it ends up filming on the smoke pipe. So regulating that from a large scale source where we don't have 100 million cars driving around, each one its own source, we're not controlling that emission at all, other than catalytic converters and a little bit more than that.
Which people many times defeat.
Which people defeat, and there's also precious metals in there. There's all sorts of problems. But a power plant, you have 4 smokestacks. You can control what is coming out of that smokestack, and regulating that, very big deal.
Or even
And we
using-
can reduce too.
Yeah.
I mean, we can all reduce our energy usage, which goes directly to that.
One of the cool things I noticed, just not to get too distracted, but there was a company that my brother-in-law worked for that was bioengineering algae to take CO2 from a power plant directly from the production of power and turn it into biofuels. So they would turn it into diesel because it flows. And that kind of a thing just shocked me because I was like, so you're producing CO2 at an industrial scale and capturing, right? Just that process to me was like, wow, we can do that. But they actually wanted it. And so, in this case, it's to make a fuel that's going to get burned again, which isn't so great. But you could also do that kind of capturing and conversion into oils, which don't get consumed and thrown back into the atmosphere. So even after we move to, let's say, an entirely electric system, which I actually really think is the way to go, just because of what Phil said, we can control how we do our electricity quite well. And there's a million and one ways to do it. If each of us is individually burning gas in our car, rolling coal, right? But so in that case, you could actually produce the things that we still need. We need oils, we need synthetic oils, right? And you could capture and hold CO2 in something like that, not just using it as fuel if the infrastructure is all electric.
The only issue with that is the amount that you would need to mine to get there.
Yeah,
That's the problem. So what I don't like, we talked about catch-all solutions. There's no such thing as your, golden bullet or whatever, right? That is a golden bullet in a lot of people's eyes. Let's just go electric and everything will be fine. No, we have to reduce our consumption because that is how we do it. I agree. That's a good idea. However, it cannot be thought of as, well, we just fixed this by going all electric. So I know the president's current idea, that was one of them, make the country electric. I couldn't disagree more because I think it will be a nightmare with how much waste we generate to do that process. It's better to say, I'm just not going to drive my car as much. I'm going to carpool more. And still getting electric vehicles is great, but not forcing a mass change that's going to create
Well, I mean,
continents of
the
waste.
change will happen just because they're better.
Sure. Sure.
And the other side is that there's so many people, even telling them to become Catholic and not eat meat on Wednesday,
Mhm.
like they used to do,
Mhm.
isn't gonna happen.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
so I think it's, this side of realism rather than
Sure.
kind of saying, no,
Sure.
you can't drive it.
There's
Been a few questions in the back there. You've had your hand up for a while.
So I agree with what you're
Oh,
saying.
no, I was thinking just behind you. Sorry.
So, question I've had for a while since we got started is you mentioned that climate change is more severe weather. Do you think the severe weather will actually hamper the ability to help change the climate for the better? Or do you think it won't really affect our goals and how to accomplish them?
So the question is that will the increase in severe weather impact the changing climate for the better?
Our ability to.
Our ability to deal with it.
So like affecting infrastructure, for example?
Yeah, I think it's perspective, right?
I mean, I can't help but think about the costs. If the southern United States is getting a massive hurricane every year or 2 years, the repair, if we're diverting all of our money to like fix the damage rather than change the situation, I could imagine there.
So I can actually respond to that a little bit. So when we were doing migratory bird banding, I can't tell you how many once in a lifetime floods I lived through down in Charleston. And part of that would be we were not able to get out to the banding site to monitor these birds. So we lost like week-long chunks in information about birds that were flying through. So that does kind of lead a little bit to we weren't able to get that data. So it's proverbially lost for that season, because I remember one time a hurricane went through right when we were supposed to get like a few like 300 bird days, which is pretty big for that station. So weren't able to get any of those birds, see how many were recaptured, how many were new. So it does kind of interfere a little bit with what we're trying to figure out, what we're trying to learn from it. So I would definitely agree with that. Yeah.
You think about Hurricane Maria, which happened 2017 and went through, and that and Irma, two of the most costliest hurricanes in US history. And we just keep track of the US. We really don't care about everything else. Maria torched Puerto Rico. I mean, to the tune of millions and millions of dollars and lots of lost lives. It was devastating to see. And that hurricane, they had already had a Category 5 hurricane pass through 2 weeks prior. We had never heard of that. In the record, in the meteorologic record, we had not heard of something like that. All of St. Croix and the surrounding US Virgin Islands were giving aid to some of the smaller Virgin Islands that were hit by the first hurricane. And then the second one came in and obliterated them. And so they had all these resources that were destroyed. I mean, underground power lines that were turned off because we had such intense waves, huge storm surges across the island. So
Maybe you want to say why that's unimaginable.
what?
Gets back to energy again, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
You would never have two massive storms following each other because the first storm would use up all the available energy.
Sure. Yeah,
But
so
now
there's
there's so much energy that, sure, four or five hurricanes in a row, all following the same track.
since the 1980s, we've seen, I believe it's a 250% increase in extreme weather. That's flooding, hurricanes, and that's not, it's not like, oh, it's coming down. Every year we get more. That in that 2017 year, Hurricane Irma equaled the normal accumulated cyclonic energy of an entire hurricane season. This is captured in one hurricane. That's not normal, right? And if we were going to have to spend, FEMA had to spend so much money, and they still didn't even give the aid that was necessary humanitarian wise. Puerto Rico is still hurting, and they're part of our country, and we still haven't given them everything we need. So if we're doing that, go see the remnants of Katrina in 2006 in New Orleans. It's still there. If that's a reality that we have to deal with on a seasonal basis.
Are we out of time?
Yes, I believe that we are. So I thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. There are many other good events that are going on today. throughout the day. There's a flyer in the back. You can scan the QR code to get the schedule of events. You're also welcome to stick around here and chat with each other. Please do. Or us. Yeah, we'll be here as well. Well, I didn't want to speak for everybody else, but
I have class in 10 minutes.
yeah. So
If you want my
thank
email
you.
address, let me know.